Imagine coming home to find a bulldozer tearing apart your sister's wheelchair ramp without warning. Now imagine that same sister stepping out of a black SUV, wearing the governor's seal. What happened next shook the entire HOA and the nation. This isn't just a story about rules gone wrong, it's a story about standing up, speaking out, and fighting back. Stick around because you won't believe how one ramp changed everything. It all started with a piece of paper, bright yellow, taped to our front door like a badge of shame. Another HOA violation notice, the fifth one this month. And every single one targeted my sister Sarah's wheelchair ramp. I tore it down without reading, already knowing the drill. Karen Thompson, the ever-watchful HOA president, had made it her personal mission to harass us over something we had every right to build. Behind me, I heard the soft whir of Sarah's electric wheelchair as she rolled up the ramp, the one Karen called an eyesore. Despite her long hours as governor, the fatigue in her eyes, and the accident that changed her life forever, Sarah still managed to smile. "Another love letter from our favorite neighbor?" she asked, her voice dry but calm. "Same nonsense," I muttered. "You'd think she'd have better things to do than stalk a legal wheelchair ramp." Through the kitchen window, we both watched as Karen stood across the street, perfectly coiffed, phone in hand, snapping photos like she was documenting a crime scene. In her designer athleisure and pearl earrings, she looked more like someone prepping for a charity gala than neighborhood enforcement. What she didn't know, or perhaps ignored, was that we'd done everything by the book. The ramp had been built by a licensed contractor, approved by the city, and painted the exact shade of gray required by HOA guidelines. But it didn't matter. Karen had shown up before the cement was even dry, HOA rulebook in hand, declaring that we hadn't filed the proper form or received board approval. She didn't care that Sarah had been injured in a crash caused by a drunk driver, or that every inch of this ramp was built to code. No, what mattered to Karen was aesthetic harmony and property values. What made it worse was how she kept scheduling HOA meetings about the ramp at times Sarah couldn't attend, like during state briefings or recovery therapy. It was no coincidence. Karen didn't know who she was messing with, but she was determined to win her petty war. Still, Sarah refused to use her title. "No special treatment," she'd said. "We'll handle it through the right channels." I respected that, but I also knew something wasn't right. When I caught Karen measuring the ramp at 6 a.m. with a tape measure and scribbling into a clipboard, something in my gut twisted. That night, I started documenting everything. Every violation notice, every photo Karen took, every conversation, no matter how small. Sarah was right. We were going to do this the right way. But I had a feeling Karen wasn't done. And deep down, I knew neither were we. The morning started like any other. I was helping Sarah into the car for her physical therapy appointment when I noticed something odd across the street. Karen wasn't alone for once. She was standing in her driveway, arms folded, talking with two men in matching suits. They were pointing toward our ramp, our legal, city-approved ramp, like it was some kind of threat. One man scribbled in a notebook while the other snapped photos from every angle. The sight made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "I don't like this," I muttered to Sarah, helping her buckle in. "They're up to something." She glanced over but shook her head. "Let them try. We've done nothing wrong. We'll handle it the right way." Sarah always believed in process. As governor, she knew the power of calm leadership. But I'd been watching Karen longer than Sarah had. Long enough to know this wasn't going to be resolved over a polite conversation or a letter to the board. As Sarah's car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner, I stayed behind and quietly reached for my phone. Through the screen, I hit record and captured Karen's voice floating over the morning breeze. "Yes, we'll need the bulldozer here first thing tomorrow morning. The board has already approved the removal." I felt my stomach lurch. Bulldozer? I rushed inside, hands shaking as I fumbled through our home office. I needed the permits, the plans, anything to prove this was sanctioned by the city, our contractor, the signed inspections. But halfway through the folder, I paused, staring at something I hadn't noticed before. The official zoning approval didn't just approve the ramp. It recognized the structure as essential accessibility infrastructure protected by federal law. This wasn't just an HOA rule dispute anymore. This was bigger. This was a potential ADA violation. And if Karen pushed forward with her plan, it wouldn't just be morally wrong. It would be criminally liable. Still, as the day went on, I couldn't shake the dread. Karen had become emboldened lately. Her confidence, the way she strutted at HOA meetings like a small-town monarch, the smug looks she gave our neighbors, it all pointed to someone who didn't fear consequences. And why would she? She'd sent violation notices without cause, fined people for flowers in non-HOA-approved planters, and even had the nerve to threaten Mr. Rodriguez for repainting his shutters the wrong shade of beige. No one had ever stopped her before. At 5:37 p.m., I checked our security camera logs. Sure enough, Karen had returned that afternoon with a clipboard in hand, standing just outside the ramp's edge, pretending to assess damages to common areas. Behind her was the unmistakable shadow of a yellow construction vehicle parked 2 streets over. It hadn't moved, but it was there, waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went back and reviewed the footage again and again, her smug expression, the way she gestured toward the ramp like it was garbage, not a lifeline. We had tried to stay quiet, to handle things civilly. But Karen wasn't interested in neighborly solutions. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted control. I plugged in my phone and organized the footage into a folder. Ramp evidence Karen HOA. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. If she brought that bulldozer, I'd be ready. And she would regret ever thinking a wheelchair ramp was more offensive than injustice. The sound woke me before the sun did, a deep mechanical growl that rattled the windows. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw the flash of orange vests through the blinds. I dropped my coffee mug in the sink and ran for the door, heart pounding. And there it was. A yellow bulldozer sat squarely in our driveway, its blade gleaming like a weapon in the morning light. 2 construction workers unrolled a string of orange cones around our front walk, casually talking as if they were setting up for landscaping, not for the demolition of a disabled woman's only access into her own home. And there, at the center of it all, stood Karen Thompson. Red blazer, clipboard in hand, lips curved into that same condescending smile she wore at every HOA meeting. She didn't look like someone enforcing community standards. She looked like a woman staging a public execution, and the ramp, our ramp, was the target. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, storming down the porch steps, phone already recording. Karen turned, that smile never breaking. "Oh, good, you're home. I have here an emergency removal order from the HOA. This structure is in direct violation of Section 4.23. She waved a piece of paper in my face, yanking it back before I could grab it. I didn't need to see it. I already knew it was a lie. "We submitted full documentation," I said through gritted teeth. "We have city permits. It's ADA compliant. You can't do this." "The city isn't the HOA," she said smoothly, like a teacher correcting a child. "And as president, I'm required to maintain neighborhood aesthetics. This ramp is unsightly. It lowers property values." Behind her, the bulldozer's engine roared to life. "Touch that ramp and you'll be violating federal disability law," I warned, my voice rising above the hum of machinery. "The Americans with Disabilities Act—" Karen rolled her eyes. "The HOA has bylaws, and notice was given." She handed another document to the bulldozer operator. "You may proceed." My fingers were shaking as I tried calling Sarah, straight to voicemail. Of course, it was budget season. She was probably locked in a state house meeting with no phone access. I tried her assistant. Nothing. The workers began measuring the ramp, uncertain now, whispering to each other. I saw one glance at me, frowning, clearly uncomfortable. He knew this wasn't right. "This is private property," I shouted. "This is her home." Karen shrugged. "The HOA has authority. The board approved this unanimously." "I am recording everything," I snapped, flipping my phone around to show the live stream already gaining viewers, "and I'll make sure the governor's legal team sees it." Karen's smile finally cracked. Just a little. But then, A horrible sound. The screech of metal meeting metal. The bulldozer's blade lowered and struck the side of the ramp. Concrete split. A piece of railing snapped free and clattered onto the lawn. I gasped, and not just from the impact, from the sheer cruelty of it. Neighbors were beginning to wake up. Mr. Rodriguez peeked from his porch, his eyes wide. He vanished inside and returned moments later, holding up his own phone, filming everything. Lights flipped on all down the street. Curtains twitched. Another chunk of the ramp broke free and tumbled. Dust and debris scattered across our walkway. And Karen? She looked pleased. "This is your last warning," I called, my voice hoarse but steady. "You're violating federal law. If you keep going, you will be arrested." Karen turned to me slowly. "The only thing being violated here is community standards. Maybe next time, ask before building an eyesore." That's when I got the text. "Keep recording. Help is 3 minutes out. Gov Security." I lowered my phone, just slightly, and looked up at Karen. "You're going to want to stop now." She laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. "Or what? You going to call your sister?" I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the corner of our street, and when those black SUVs came rolling in, sirens blaring behind them, I saw Karen's face turn pale for the first time. She had no idea that her power trip was about to become a state-level scandal, and that she had just bulldozed her own reputation into the ground. The roar of the bulldozer still echoed in my ears, but it was quickly drowned out by something else. The unmistakable wail of sirens cutting through the calm of our suburban street. Karen froze mid-command, her hand halfway raised to signal the operator for another swipe at the now battered wheelchair ramp. She turned, blinking against the flashing red and blue lights that bathed her lawn in urgent pulses. Then came the black SUVs, 3 of them, sleek, tinted, unmistakable. They rolled in like a convoy of consequence, taking over the cul-de-sac with silent authority. Neighbors who had peeked through curtains minutes earlier now streamed out onto their lawns, clutching robes and coffee mugs, whispering to each other in disbelief. Karen's smirk twisted into something unrecognizable. She stumbled a step backward, shielding her eyes as 2 uniformed state police officers stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by a sharp-looking man in a dark suit, earpiece in place, jaw set like stone. And then, the moment that would forever split our neighborhood into before and after. The back door of the 3rd SUV opened. Out rolled Sarah, my sister. In her tailored navy blue blazer with the state crest on the lapel, her hair perfectly swept, and a calm authority radiating from every inch of her posture. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Even Mr. Jenkins, who never left his porch for anything but mail and flag duty, stepped forward in awe. Karen's mouth dropped open. What is this?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her security team fanned out, clearing a path as she approached what remained of the ramp, now little more than crumbled concrete and exposed metal. Then she spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, addressing Karen by name for the first time in public. "This stopped being a neighborhood dispute the moment you authorized the destruction of ADA-compliant access infrastructure, without permit, without court order, and in violation of federal and state law." The silence was electric. Even the bulldozer operator turned off the engine. Karen's hands fluttered like broken wings. I didn't know that I'm the governor?" Sarah finished for her, raising an eyebrow. "Or that bulldozing a disabled person's only access to their home could land you in federal court?" The air went still. Karen tried to recover, clutching her folder of papers like a shield. "The HOA has rules this structure violated." "You violated the Americans with Disabilities Act," Sarah said, cutting her off, "and trespassed on private property, and authorized the use of heavy machinery without municipal approval. Shall I go on?" From the crowd, phones rose, filming every second. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whispered, "Good Lord, she really is the governor." Sarah nodded to her lead security agent, who stepped forward and handed a thick folder to one of the state police officers. "Inside are the permits, plans, city approvals, and medical necessity documentation," she said. "All ignored, all legally binding." Karen looked like she might faint. Then, like a final nail, two state investigators emerged, carrying clipboards and plastic folders marked HOA financial records. Their expressions were grim. "Mrs. Thompson," one said, "we'll need you to come with us. There are questions regarding today's demolition and discrepancies in HOA fund allocations." Karen turned red, then white. "This is harassment!" "No," Sarah said quietly. "This is accountability." I could hardly breathe as the police led Karen to their car, her once pristine red blazer now streaked with dirt from the ramp debris. Her heels clicked unevenly against the sidewalk. A woman who had strutted through our neighborhood for years, now stumbling out of it in handcuffs. The crowd parted as she passed. Not a soul spoke up for her. And then Sarah turned to the neighborhood. "This isn't just about a ramp," she said, her voice rising for all to hear. "It's about fairness, about how we treat each other, about how power is meant to serve, not to silence." Murmurs turned to nods. A few neighbors clapped softly. Sarah looked down at what used to be her ramp, then back at the people watching. "We will rebuild, not just the ramp, but the way this community governs itself." And just like that, the power Karen once held over the neighborhood crumbled faster than the concrete she tried to erase. That morning, we didn't just stop a bulldozer. We witnessed the moment truth came rolling down the street, wrapped in flashing lights, and dignity rolled out to meet it. The day after Karen was escorted away by state police, it was as if a dam had broken. Not of water, but of truth. Stories, long buried under fear and silence, began to pour out like a flood. Our neighborhood, once a quiet row of identical lawns and HOA-enforced flower beds, buzzed with energy. Not gossip, not outrage, something deeper. The quiet realization that we had all been living under the same shadow. And now, for the first time, it had lifted. It started with Mrs. Chen from across the street. She was always kind, always quiet. But that morning, as neighbors gathered around Sarah's front yard, still littered with the crushed remains of the ramp, Mrs. Chen stepped forward. She clutched a folder of faded documents and receipts. "Karen made me tear out my medical herb garden," she said, voice trembling. "Said it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. I had doctor's notes. It didn't matter. She fined me every week until I gave in." The crowd gasped, and then someone else stepped up. Mr. Rodriguez, the Korean War veteran who had trouble walking. "She fined me $200 a day," he growled, "for installing a wheelchair lift for my son, who lost his legs in Iraq." That moment turned our street into a reckoning ground. One by one, neighbors came forward. A mother revealed that Karen had forced her to remove a sensory-friendly swing set built for her autistic son. An elderly man had been fined for having his grandchildren stay over too often. A retired couple shared that they had been harassed for flying their American flag too high on a pole, not approved by the HOA board. Karen's reign hadn't just been unfair, it had been personal, cruel, and targeted. As Sarah reviewed the mounting testimonials with her legal team, it became clear this wasn't just a series of unfortunate HOA decisions. This was a pattern, one rooted in discrimination, manipulation, and unchecked power. Then came the financials. After Karen was removed from her post, the HOA treasurer, a mild-mannered man named Gerald, who rarely spoke at meetings, handed Sarah a flash drive. "I've been keeping copies," he said, just in case someone ever stood up to her. Inside were years of misused funds. Thousands of dollars in fines collected for community improvements had quietly paid for renovations on Karen's house. Her kitchen remodel, a backyard pergola, private landscaping services disguised as aesthetic compliance assessments. She had been using HOA fees, the very money she fined us for missing lawn edging or mailbox color, to build her own empire of control. It didn't stop there. Karen had never been officially elected. She'd taken over when the former HOA president moved away and never filed the paperwork with the county. She had no legal right to issue most of her violations, no authority to bulldoze anything. And yet, for years, no one had stopped her. Until now. Sarah's legal team compiled the evidence into a comprehensive report, one that made its way to the State Housing Commissioner's office and several major news outlets. The headlines wrote to themselves, "Governor's wheelchair ramp destroyed by rogue HOA president. Ramp scandal uncovers years of HOA abuse and fraud." The HOA board collapsed almost overnight. 3 members resigned. The HOA's lawyer quit. And for the first time in years, our neighborhood felt free. But the most powerful moment came that evening when neighbors gathered again in front of our house. Not to argue, not to complain, but to plan. Under a fading sunset, people signed a petition to form a new HOA, one built on transparency, compassion, and respect. Volunteers stepped forward to serve. Veterans, parents, retirees. The new HOA president? Mrs. Chen. And Sarah? She agreed to serve as legal oversight. Not as the governor, but as a neighbor. What Karen had tried to destroy had become the foundation for something far greater. A community reborn from courage, accountability, and the quiet strength of people who'd had enough. In the days following the HOA scandal, our neighborhood had transformed into something we'd never seen before. A place of conversations, of shared truths, and above all, of long overdue courage. But what happened next proved that Sarah, my sister, wasn't just fighting back for herself. She was about to fight for everyone. The broken ramp had become a symbol, not just of Karen's cruelty, but of a much bigger problem that no one had truly addressed before. Across our state, and even the country, there were whispers of HOAs abusing their power, of neighbors turned into watchdogs, of disabled and elderly residents fined for simply trying to live in dignity. And Sarah, the governor, had heard enough. One morning she called a press conference, not from a marble podium in the State House, but from our front yard, with the rubble of her ramp still behind her like a reminder of what sparked it all. A cluster of microphones stood before her wheelchair as news vans lined the block. Our neighbors, still shaken by the scandal, gathered in folding chairs and on curbs, unsure what to expect. Sarah cleared her throat and spoke calmly, with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout the chaos. "There are moments," she began, "when a personal injustice reveals a systemic one. This wasn't just about my ramp. It wasn't just about a power-hungry HOA president. It was about a broken system that allows unelected individuals to punish citizens, sometimes the most vulnerable among us, without oversight." She paused, letting the words settle in the air. "That ends today." She then held up a thick packet of papers. "I'm introducing new legislation, the Right to Home Happiness Act. This bill will establish clear limits on HOA authority, protect homeowners with disabilities and chronic illness, require transparent elections and financial records, and guarantee that any physical changes made for medical reasons, like ramps, lifts, or safety bars, cannot be denied or punished by an HOA." The crowd erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that came from the chest, from people who had been waiting years to be heard. But Sarah wasn't finished. She invited neighbors, those who had been fined, harassed, silenced, to step forward and share their stories. Mr. Jenkins, whose daughter's treehouse had been removed. The Wilsons, fined for having too many cars in the driveway while caring for elderly parents, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been fined for her garden gnome and threatened with a lien. For every voice that cracked with fear or frustration, Sarah's bill promised clarity, protection, and hope. And then, something unexpected happened. Lawmakers from neighboring districts reached out. A popular YouTube lawyer who covered housing injustice offered to advocate for the bill nationwide. A disability rights nonprofit pledged to sponsor its rollout. Within a week, the legislation had co-sponsors from both parties. By the end of the month, it was already headed for committee hearings. What started as one HOA gone rogue had become a statewide movement for fairness, with Sarah leading the charge, not from anger, but from principle. As we stood on the porch that night, watching neighbors light candles along the new ramp path now under construction, Sarah turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "Laws are just words until someone needs them." And now, thanks to her, the law was finally listening. Because when justice is denied, leadership rises. And sometimes, The best laws are written in the aftermath of injustice. What began as destruction ended with rebirth. In the weeks after the incident, our street transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. The broken wheelchair ramp that once symbolized injustice had been rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. Volunteers from all corners of the neighborhood came together to paint it with soft colors and floral patterns, guided by local artists and the neighborhood's children. At night, gentle solar lights made it glow like a beacon, not just of accessibility, but of unity. But it wasn't just a ramp. It was the beginning of something larger. The HOA board, once ruled by fear and favoritism, had dissolved entirely. In its place stood a new democratically elected leadership, people who didn't just enforce rules, but listened, welcomed, helped. They even turned the old violations office into a community help center where volunteers offered assistance to elderly residents with home repairs, paperwork, or simply company over coffee. Instead of fine notices, neighbors began receiving welcome baskets. Instead of lawsuits, they got handwritten invitations to community barbecues. Our front yard, which had once been watched with suspicion and clipboards, was now a gathering place. One Saturday, Sarah hosted a neighborhood potluck, and over 100 people showed up. Formerly quiet residents brought homemade casseroles, folding chairs, and laughter. I watched kids with popsicles play under the evening sun, while parents shared stories of their first homes, their hopes, their pride. Mr. Rodriguez brought his father out in his wheelchair, for the first time in years, he said, without fear of being cited for excessive driveway usage. The most touching moment came when a moving truck pulled up next door. A new family, 3 young children, 2 energetic dogs, and a kind grandmother with a walker, stepped out. At first, there was a silence. Then, one by one, neighbors came forward, offering hands, lifting boxes, setting up furniture. And right there on the edge of their yard stood a brand new wheelchair ramp. Not a single complaint, just smiles. What Karen tried to tear down had become the foundation for a new beginning. A neighborhood where kindness wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. A place where no one felt small or silenced again. As Sarah wheeled beside me at dusk, watching the children race across our once quiet lawn, she smiled and whispered, "We didn't just fix a ramp, we built something better." And she was right. The rubble may have been cleared, but the lesson remains. When a community chooses compassion over control, when neighbors choose each other over power, even the deepest cracks can be filled. Not with concrete, but with care. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built not from concrete, but from courage. The story of Sarah's wheelchair ramp may have started with injustice, but it ended with inspiration, and within it are lessons that speak deeply to those of us who've lived through decades of change, challenge, and community life. First and foremost, it reminds us that silence can be costly, but speaking up, even when it's hard, can change everything. When the HOA tried to intimidate a disabled homeowner with baseless rules, it was the act of documenting, sharing, and standing firm that brought truth into the light. For many older adults who've witnessed bureaucracy go unchecked, this story reinforces the power of record-keeping, advocacy, and knowing your rights. Second, it's a testament to the resilience of community when built on respect, not rules. Karen's HOA ruled with fear, punishing gardens, wheelchair ramps, and even holiday lights. But when neighbors began talking, understanding each other's struggles, a new kind of neighborhood was born. It teaches us that while regulations have a place, they must never come at the cost of compassion. Third, it affirms that leadership with empathy leaves a legacy. Sarah could have used her position as governor from the beginning, but she waited, not for power, but for principle. Her approach reflects a kind of leadership many elders understand, one that listens before it acts, one that believes in earning trust instead of demanding obedience. Finally, it's proof that even small acts, a ramp, a phone recording, a neighbor's camera, can ignite big change. For older audiences who may feel overlooked in today's fast-moving world, This story is a powerful reminder that experience, patience, and doing what's right still hold incredible weight. In the end, the bulldozed ramp didn't mark defeat. It marked a turning point. And in a world that sometimes feels too loud, too divided, this story offers something rare: hope. Hope that communities can come together, hope that justice can still be served, and hope that standing up, no matter your age or position, is always worth it. Because dignity doesn't retire, and doing the right thing never goes out of style.